Hello, I'm Pastor Nanette Christofferson, and along with Pastor Steve Talmadge, we offer these short Bible studies on our lectionary readings. This week, we are in Lent 6, also known as Passion and Palm Sunday, and our reading is from Isaiah chapter 50, 4 through 9, and we find ourselves in Isaiah in the suffering servant chapters, I would call it, or servant songs of Isaiah. So let's find out a little bit more about this and what that is. Let's read Isaiah 50, 4 through 9. The Lord God has given me the tongue of a teacher, that I might know how to sustain the weary with the word. Morning by morning he wakens my ear to listen as those who are taught. The Lord God has opened my ear, and I was not rebellious. I did not turn backward. I gave my back to those who struck me, and my cheeks to those who pulled out the beard. I did not hide my face from insult and spitting. The Lord God helps me. Therefore I have not been disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like flint, and I know that I shall not be put to shame. He who vindicates me is near. Who will contend with me? Let us stand up together. Who are my adversaries? Let them confront me. It is the Lord God who helps me. Who will declare me guilty? All of them will wear out like a garment. The moth will eat them up. So let's take a little closer look at this. And this passage is often part of what scholars call Second Isaiah. And you've heard Pastor Steve and I talk about this a lot. That Isaiah covers a huge wealth of time in the near ancient world. And we believe that this was written around the time of the exile in Babylon. These are the things that are going on for the people of Israel. Jerusalem has fallen, the temple is destroyed, and the people feel defeated, ashamed, and spiritually disoriented. And they're asking the question, has God abandoned us? So, who is this servant? The servant is a compelling and strong character whose dignity and ferocity are at odds with his beaten visage. And the prophet of 2nd Isaiah offers him to the people in exile as a powerful symbol of courage and hope in the midst of profound suffering. Indeed, the prophet offers the model of the servant to the people and calls them to be like him, to understand their own suffering as he does, rooted in the call to be faithful servants of God. The servant is a servant of God, but let's look at this a little closer. The servant of God is never given a name in these poems, suggesting that the poems about the servant are not descriptions of a historical individual, or at least are not only descriptions of an actual person, but are deliberately nonspecific in order to allow the people to imagine themselves as a servant. When there is a particular name associated with the servant, the name is Israel or Jacob, indicating that the prophet's intent is for the people as a whole to see themselves as the servant and not to associate the term with one particular person. It is really easy for us as Christians to put our Christian lens on this text and make this has got to be Jesus. And through a Christological viewpoint, we would look at it that way. But we also have to think about the original audience and who it was written for. And it may have been a set of prophecy describing who Jesus is, but maybe it was also meant to just allow the people to imagine themselves as a servant and what that would look like. And the prophet is describing a blameless individual. The servant of these 4 servant poems is a blameless individual whose faithfulness to God is unparalleled and whose suffering is extreme. Some have argued that the servant cannot possibly be the people in exile because they were not beyond reproach. But 2nd Isaiah begins with the admission that the suffering of the people has exceeded the fault, meaning Jerusalem has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. When we think about Babylon, the people of God in exile definitely felt abandoned by God, and yet God continues to send them prophets, even while they are held in captivity in Babylon. So as we look at the Hebrew word translated slave, here is the same word translated as servant in the texts that speak of God's servant in the rest of 2nd Isaiah. Considering the fact that the people in exile were under the control of Babylon, it is surely significant that the prophet does not speak of their lives and their labor as belonging to anyone but God. As God's own servant, the people are divinely called and empowered, and they will ultimately be vindicated. Reading Isaiah 54 through 9, in light of the servant imagery, we find throughout Isaiah 40 to 55 highlights the fact that the servant is not to be viewed simply as a description of a particular person in history. Open ears, learned and sustaining speech, a staunch faith, and a willingness to suffer are the hallmarks of the ideal servant of God. God's calling to be my servant is issued to the people in exile, struggling to maintain their identity as God's own people in the midst of the Babylonian Empire. It is a powerful calling, and it issues through the ages to Judea in the 1st century and to us as well. So just a couple questions to think about. How have you read this text in the past? I know for me, I've often read this text as thinking of Jesus as the suffering servant, but I also know that it brings to light, and it's important to focus on who this text was for. And was it for us as Christians? Maybe it was, and a Christological lens, right, of this text. But I also believe that this text was written perhaps to set an example of what the suffering servant is like, or perhaps prophecy of what a suffering servant will be like. What does it look like? When his beard is pulled, showing humility. A suffering servant or a servant is humiliated and yet doesn't retaliate as well. So as I think about this text and how it's been read in the past, for me it's easy to think that it really kind of works both ways. And sometimes for us, when I look at this text, it's easy to think, can't people see that this is Jesus? But that's what makes the Old Testament and the New Testament always so interesting, because there's always a different lens that people can bring to it. Does this commentary help you understand how the servant described is a model for servant leadership? And I think it does. I think that it helps us understand what does it look like to be a servant leader. And we often don't talk about this enough, because servant leadership is a very difficult way to lead. It's a way of leading that promotes peace, a way of leading in dialogue to hear both sides, a way of leading in which both sides can be heard and respected and know that they are loved. And so I think that servant leadership is a difficult way to lead, but it's also what Jesus demands of us and asks of us. Well, I hope that some of it was commentary from Callie Plunkett Bruton, and some of it was just information added in from our Lutheran Study Bible. I pray as we get ready to enter into this week of Passion that you have some time to think about the servant and to think about what kind of model Jesus was for us and continues to be. Have a blessed week as we journey to the cross.